Welcome to the night section.
He struck a deal the industry said was impossible. He kept the masters. He kept the money. He kept the power. This is the story of how one man rose from the streets of New Orleans to build a hip-hop empire worth hundreds of millions, defying all expectations along the way. They called him Birdman, but the same hands that built it crushed it from within. This is how Birdman's ambition became his downfall. It all began with a deal that redefined ownership in hip-hop. And this was Birdman cutting an agreement with Universal that allowed Cash Money to keep 85% of royalties and full control of their masters. On the surface, it looked like a victory for the artist, a symbol of independence. Yet beneath that triumph, it became Birdman's greatest weapon. With that new authority, control meant responsibility, and Birdman used that control as leverage. Before long, the same people who helped him build the label were being pushed aside. Some were sued, some were silenced, and others forced out. It is a story of one man's choices and how they reshaped everything. However, before the fame, before the cars and diamond grills, came struggle and survival. Two brothers, Brian Baby Williams and Ronald Slim Williams, who learned to hustle early in the New Orleans Magnolia projects. The brothers lost their mother while young, and the streets became both their teacher and their testing ground. Their father owned small businesses, bars, stores, and a laundromat, so entrepreneurship was in their DNA. Around them, a new sound was forming, New Orleans bounce. And Birdman didn't wait for an opportunity, he created it. In 1991, they founded Cash Money Records, not in a boardroom, but in the heart of the projects. They printed business cards, drew a logo, and hit the streets selling tapes from car trunks. This was with no radio support, no label backing, just drive and pure hustle. Their first signings were artists Kilo G, Lil Slim, UNLV, and Pimp Daddy. Then Manny Fresh arrived and gave the label its voice. Manny's production gave Cash Money its heartbeat. His beats made the city move. The label sounded like New Orleans and felt like family. It convinced fans, executives, and artists that Cash Money was something rare, independent, and unstoppable, and that momentum grew quickly. Then came a young voice filled with hunger named Juvenile. His success opened huge doors. Soon after, a group emerged that would define hip-hop forever. The Hot Boys, made up of Juvenile, BG, Turk, and a 14-year-old prodigy named, yes you guessed it, Lil Wayne. Birdman understood branding as well as music. He sold a vision, he sold a lifestyle. Cash Money became more than a label. It was a statement of independence, but behind the scenes, business was messy, contracts were verbal, and the accounting was loose and casual. What Birdman saw as flexibility, others began to see as manipulation. As Cash Money grew, so did Birdman's ambition. He wasn't content with local fame. He wanted power, the kind that no label executive could take from him. So, in 1998, Birdman and Slim negotiated the biggest independent label deal in rap history, a $30 million distribution partnership with Universal. The industry was stunned. Birdman negotiated hard. He had refused to surrender master rights, securing an unheard of 85% royalty split, and Universal Music Group would distribute the music, but Cash Money would keep the ownership. It was revolutionary, a blueprint for independent labels. Birdman later bragged and said, quote, "I refused to give them anything. The Universal deal made Cash Money a modern power player, yet that independence came with consequences. With full control of the finances, Birdman became the gatekeeper. He decided who got paid and when. Power had shifted, and that power would soon tear everything he built apart. The first cracks appeared quietly. Wendy Day, the consultant who brokered the Universal deal, was promised a standard fee. She never received it.
I had to file suit to get paid. A lot of people have to get what's owed to them. People continue to work with them in spite of the reputation of non-payment because they're brilliant. They have this unbelievable marketing strategy that works, and they're able to propel artists to success.
When she asked, Birdman reportedly told her, quote, "Sue me. When I have to pay you, you'll get paid." That, however, was only the beginning. T-shirt manufacturers, security, office rent, suppliers, producers, and even artists began whispering about missing checks. Yet while the disputes grew, Cash Money's music dominated the airwaves. Juvenile's album, 400 Degrees, went multi-platinum. It changed the game and became a national anthem. Back That A Up, and BG's Bling Bling exploded in clubs and coast-to-coast radio. The Hot Boys of Juvenile, BG, Turk, and Lil Wayne became the face of the label and a cultural brand. Manny Fresh crafted the hit sounds that ruled radio, and Lil Wayne, a prodigy teenager, began to rise as the label's crown jewel. Now, Birdman took Wayne under his wing as more than an artist. He called him his son. Together, they projected to the world loyalty and family. And on the surface, Cash Money was an unstoppable major player. By the early 2000s, while rival empires like Rockefeller, Death Row, and Murder Inc. fell apart, Cash Money appeared to stay on top. But inside the house of Cash Money, cracks were spreading. Artists started noticing missing royalties and delayed payments. The pattern continued to repeat. It was hits on the charts, millions in sales, tours, and merchandise, yet money somehow disappeared, and there was an ugly silence when the checks didn't arrive. Lil Slim and UNLV had seen it years earlier. They left after realizing sales didn't match payouts. Words like "I wasn't paid" and shady accounting wove through conversations that were once private. By the early 2000s, bigger names followed. Juvenile walked away in 2001, citing unpaid royalties after the Project English album. BG claimed he never received a dime from his pre-1998 albums. Turk filed a lawsuit in 2015 for over $1 million, alleging 80 songs were unpaid and unregistered at the Copyright Office. And then the most painful departure, Manny Fresh, the in-house beatmaker who sculpted the label's sound. In 2005, he walked away, saying bluntly, quote, "I left Cash Money because of money, scratch moolah." The artists just wanted what they considered fair compensation for their work. The response ranged from legal threats to denials and occasional settlement. Each exit followed the same pattern: success, betrayal, and accusations of unpaid royalties. But Birdman didn't slow down. Instead of changing course, he tightened control, convinced the empire was his to command alone. The empire still shined in public, but beneath the surface, it was cracking, and soon everything would come crashing down. By 2005, Lil Wayne had become the last soldier standing from Cash Money's original roster. Moreover, under Birdman's watch, he rose into national stardom and quickly became the biggest rapper alive. The Carter III sold over 1 million copies in its first week, cementing his place in hip-hop history. Birdman, determined to keep his empire alive, made a risky but savvy move. He offered Lil Wayne a promotion. Wayne became a label president and received his own imprint, Young Money Entertainment. However, Birdman still retained majority control at 51%, while Wayne held 49%. It felt like an elevation, yet the higher Wayne climbed, the more he realized how much Birdman controlled and how little he was truly earning. When Tyga, Drake, and Nicki Minaj arrived under Wayne's wing, success followed. Their records sold millions, making Cash Money richer than ever. However, while all that revenue still flowed through a system where Birdman sat at the top of the funnel, Wayne began to allege that the money never flowed cleanly. By the early 2000s, the list of grievances had swelled. Moreover, producers of the Carter III filed lawsuits over unpaid royalties. This included people like Bangladesh, Jim Johnson, Diesel, DVLP, and others, who all asked the same question: where are the checks? Bangladesh claimed about $500,000 in unpaid royalties, while others sought millions for hits like Lollipop and Got Money. Tyga, another example, publicly accused Cash Money of holding his album hostage, saying he earned millions but had seen none. The public anger sharpened, and Cash Money's image began to resemble a firm that paid in lawsuits rather than just due and loyalty. By 2014, tensions reached a breaking point. Lil Wayne took to Twitter, accusing Birdman of stifling the Carter V. He told fans that the label had turned him into a prisoner of contract. On December 4th, 2014, Wayne tweeted a public apology to fans, stating he couldn't release the Carter V because Birdman and Cash Money refused to release it. He ended with one line that echoed across the industry: "I want off this label." What followed in early 2015 was explosive, a $51 million lawsuit. Wayne accused Birdman of breaching contract, withholding advances, and refusing to pay profits owed to Young Money artists. The lawsuit also sought full control of Young Money. The conflict was no longer a rumor. It was public, legal, and ugly. It became a power struggle between mentor and protege. The man who once called Wayne son now stood as his enemy. It wasn't just business anymore, it was a family feud. Public, bitter, and humiliating. Moreover, Wayne's protege, Drake and Nicki Minaj, were caught in the middle. Both were signed through Wayne's Young Money under Birdman's Cash Money umbrella, a tangled web of contracts that made it nearly impossible to know who truly owned what. The public fallout shifted the narrative entirely. Birdman, once the architect of the empire, was now the antagonist in one of hip-hop's most visible family disputes. Then came the darkest chapter, allegations of violent retaliation. An April 2015 shooting targeted Lil Wayne's tour bus after a show. Rumors spread that Birdman and his new protege, Young Thug, were connected. An Atlanta indictment linked phone records that included Birdman's number to individuals suspected in the attack. Though he denied involvement and was never charged, the implication was devastating. In the court of public opinion, the Cash Money family had finally cracked. Every lawsuit was a message, every settlement a secret buried under NDAC. The music still sold, but the trust evaporated. Birdman's grip on masters and catalogs allowed him to negotiate every settlement on his terms. That leverage made him rich and everyone else bitter. Finally, in 2018, the long war ended. After years of stalemate, Universal intervened and facilitated a multi-million-dollar settlement that freed Lil Wayne from his Cash Money obligations. The Carter 5 was released under Young Money and Republic Records. Wayne reclaimed his label, his freedom, and his dignity. Birdman, meanwhile, kept ownership of a chunk of the back catalog, but ceded future claims. Wayne's freedom became symbolic, not just for him, but for every artist trapped by label politics. The student had finally pried the keys from the teacher. After Wayne's exit, the structure that had kept Cash Money relevant collapsed. Moreover, as Drake fulfilled his contract obligations, he shifted to a direct Universal deal, cutting Birdman out entirely. Nicki Minaj quietly disentangled from the label, while Tyga sued for $12 million in unpaid royalties and settled in 2018. The superstar roster that once fueled Cash Money was gone. Birdman retained the catalog and masters, ensuring steady royalties. However, he had lost the creative engine that gave the brand life. More lawsuits followed. Publishing companies, producers, and even staff sued for unpaid royalties and legal fees. A 2016 case claimed over $3.3 million in missing song royalties. Meanwhile, Birdman's public image deteriorated rapidly. Fans began to see him not as a mogul, but as a manipulator. Media outlets labeled him the Suge Knight of the South. Former artists echoed the same complaint. They were never fully paid. Even industry peers turned on him. Rick Ross released a diss track titled Idols Become Rivals, a direct expose disguised as music. Ross accused Birdman of robbing his artists and disrespecting Wayne's legacy. Then came the viral Breakfast Club clip. Birdman stormed out after demanding, "Put some respect on my name." The phrase became a meme.
Nigga, when my name come up, respect it.
Let's go.
Stop playing with my fucking name. I'll drill y'all.
A symbol of a man losing control of his own narrative. The trap of power had finally trapped him. In the end, Cash Money no longer produced the genius it once did. Settlements closed many legal doors, but left open wounds. Producers, managers, and former artists carried scars. Legal fees drained resources, but worse, the trust was gone. The label could still license old masters and profit from the past. However, it could never recreate the culture it had shattered. Birdman was the last man standing from his empire. He still held catalogs, publishing rights, and assets. However, the talent, the trust, and the brotherhood that once defined Cash Money were gone. How should history measure Birdman? Genius or villain? Perhaps both. Without him, Cash Money would never have reshaped hip-hop culture. He brokered an unprecedented deal, nurtured artists from the projects to platinum, and played chess with his rivals, often winning, yet the other side of the ledger tells a different story. The list of unpaid producers and unsettled lawsuits is long. Some settled quietly, others walked away with nothing but resentment. Today, the numbers still favor Birdman. He sits atop a mountain of masters and licensing rights worth tens of millions annually. However, influence is not legacy. Legacy is measured by who you elevate and how your work endures. Without you, Cash Money had lost its sound, its stars, and its dominance. The label still existed on paper, but the magic, the hunger that made it unstoppable was gone. Birdman still calls himself the #1 stunner. He claims no regrets. He insists he made millionaires, and that the business was simply business. But history tells a harder truth. Cash Money Records was both his greatest creation and his greatest downfall. He didn't just build Cash Money, he was Cash Money. Brian Birdman Williams turned struggle into gold. He made stars, defined an era, and shaped the sound of a generation. However, the same hunger that fueled his rise consumed his legacy. His empire fell the same way it rose, all under his control. Was Birdman a visionary lost in his ambition, or a hustler who never learned when to stop hustling? Either way, one truth remains clear. The story of Cash Money will forever be the story of Birdman.